And don't send me to this dude named, what's his name? Flip? Flip, if you're watching this, click off. I don't consent to being put on your channel. I do not. I don't consent. Flip!
こいつのサッカー人生は終わる。いや、やらなきゃ。ここはそういう場所だ。俺が夢を叶えるってことは、誰かの夢を終わらせるってことだ。
Flip, if you're watching this, I do not consent to being roasted.
違うな。このままじゃ、今までの俺と同じだ。人生変えに来てんだよ。世界一になりに来てんだよ。自分より強いやつに勝たなきゃ何も変われない。一番強いやつ。
Hello there, Flip here, and today, no, this is not an April Fool's joke, my upload schedule isn't that bad. Anyways, today we're going to be doing another Genshin court on probably the most well-established Genshin theory crafter on both YouTube and Twitch. I went to Zajef77, Mr. Thundering Fury himself. He has helped popularize and explain some of the way too dank teams and mechanics, giving more people insight into theory crafting, which especially in this community is really appreciated. And I do think if you were to go to a Genshin content creator for the best info, it would be him. But at the same time, no one is free of criticisms or having biases, and there are some things that Jeff has said, calculated and brought up that have bred misconceptions or spread it. Not gonna lie, this was a video I never really planned to make. I don't watch that much Genshin content in general unless it's for a video, so my Genshin courts often end up being viewer requests, which, you know, most people don't recommend I look into the Jeff. I only really decided to make this because I saw a video by a creator called Genshin Noir, and he made a pretty funny video on the Jeff Sino takes, and you know, talking about creators is my job, you fuck, hence this Genshin court. And for those of you who don't know what the Genshin court is or what it entails, the TLDR of it is I'll be trialing Genshin content creators based on their takes on certain characters or the game in general, and give them a fitting sentence accordingly. So Zajef, in contrast to others I've courted, he actually has a lot of Genshin knowledge, whether that's on the meta, complex mechanics and team building. So finding faults for him was a lot more different from someone like Tenha, who I just covered, or Vars. Ironically enough, Zajef's game knowledge is actually a double-edged sword because it causes him to be overly analytical of characters or mechanics, finding and picking out flaws that aren't actually that relevant or can easily be circumvented, sort of inventing issues or problems in a way, highlighted clearly in the first piece of evidence, which happens to be a banner review on the current rate up. So let's take a look at that, shall we?
Pretty decent for damage. C6 is also pretty decent for damage. Without those constellations, she's not doing much damage. With them, she's doing an okay, reasonable amount.
And even then, her damage isn't really relevant enough to where...
In most teams, her portion of the team's DPS is not going to be high enough that you need to get the constellations for her to be useful.
This is going to be harder than I thought.
Her C2 is the big one. At 12 seconds, right, you gotta keep in mind, you usually have some setup. If you're doing something like Cookie E, Nahida, EQ, Singto, EQ into a Hytham, for example. By the time you get to a Hytham and you use the stuff, Cookie's got like between 6 and 8 seconds depending on how well you did your swaps.
Yeah, see what I mean by inventing issues? The problem here has nothing to do with Cookie's uptime, this is just a shit rotation. Cookie's skill doesn't last as long as Nahida or Jingcho's, there's no point in going with her first at all. He does later go in to say,
so you'd be forced to use her E later on in the rotation, which would mean that you're not triggering your Cs during your setup. It can be a pretty sizable loss of DPS.
But even going by that logic, it's still wrong. Hyper Bloom is a 3-stage reaction. If you wanted to generate blooms first, you would most likely do Nahida into Jingcho. If you wanted to get Cookie's procs early while also getting hyper blooms, you would do Nahida into Cookie into Jingcho. There is literally no reason to ever start with Cookie, and actually if you wanted to do a cool tech with Cookie and Hytham, you could do something like Nahida EQ to Jingcho EQ to Hytham Q to Cookie E and back to Hytham. This allows you to get all 3 mirrors as they appear 2 seconds after he bursts, and maximize Cookie's E uptime alongside Hytham's 3 mirrors. You do miss off some initial blooms, but the trade-off is definitely worth it, especially on a lower con Cookie, and it's definitely not a sizable loss of DPS.
She's got Animo MC syndrome, where it's not that her kit is bad, or that what she does isn't good, it's that other characters just do it better. If it wasn't for those other characters, Cookie would be considered a good character.
That's quite a bold statement. You go on then to basically contradict yourself by saying all of Dory's strengths have a weakness, cancelling out the strengths she would have. Kuki or any of the Electro units not existing wouldn't make Dory a necessarily stronger unit, you would just have less options and therefore be forced to play Dory. Like how wonderful of a state Dendra was in before we got much better units.
But in a vacuum, if you don't have Kuki, or if you just really like her and want to play her, she's fine. You can make functional teams with her. You can use her in your Hyperbloom teams. It won't be too much of a problem.
Not really. Dory Hyperbloom is extremely scuffed. Assuming you don't have Jean to self-swirl and proc Hyperblooms that way, Dory's beam connecting her and her lamp is pretty fucking short. So against enemies that like move, it's not practical or easy to slot Dory into Hyperbloom teams. And even with Jean with self-swirling, if enemies are just far away or can reposition like with Kenki, the team falls apart really hard and ends up being extremely punishing to play. The only real solution is to play something like I hate myself for mentioning this, but Hyper Fridge Dory with someone like Ganyu, because that way the enemies stay grouped up if you can position them correctly.
Sac Frag is nice to have for Sucrose, but the refines on it aren't like all that useful.
I mean, 16 seconds is low enough to be used every rotation unless you're doing really precise taser stuff. And taser rotations still end up being extremely flexible there as well. For on-fielding Sucrose, having an extra skill is an extra double swirl in taser or extra aggravate swirl in quicken teams. Or if you just need the grouping, having an extra skill every rotation can be really helpful, and all of this is boosted even further if you have C4. If this weapon is lower than R3, arguably even R4, you barely feel a bonus, due to the low proc rate and cooldown between the sac procs.
Nilo is truly like one of those teams that like really kind of exists separately from the other teams in the game, right? Like if you have a Nilo team that's actually vertically invested and you actually enjoy playing it, you're probably never really gonna need to use a different team.
I can try to get what you mean to an extent, but that point isn't really exclusive to Nilo teams. If you vertically invest in any team with constellations and refinements, you also get to a point where you have one side secured. Let's look at something like Raiden C2 for example, or whatever crack addict made anything on Yelan. Anyways, that will close off this piece of evidence. As expected, nothing too major so far, but we'll see if it stays that way. The only real main issue present is that it seems Zajef is trying to be way too overly analytical, to the point like with what he said about Kuki is just reaching for a negative, and with his Nilo and Dory takes is just reaching for a positive. This could also be because most of what he says is unscripted on his live stream, so he doesn't really have the luxury to revise his statements or carefully articulate what he means better. At most, I can give a minor professional negligence charge for a few months. So now with that first piece of evidence concluded, let's look into our second one, which is going to be a Twitch clip that was brought to my attention, which in contrast to his YouTube videos, you'll see.
Dude, why can't Kokomi heal as good as Yao Yao, man? Like, if Yao Yao was my unit that was level 90 here, and like it didn't affect the damage, I would never even come close to dying.
Okay, what do I even tackle here first? Even on a full EM build, Kokomi and Yayao's healings are in a different league in practical scenarios, as Yayao can end up targeting enemies instead of the active character, gimping your healing, and making it inconsistent when you're over 70% health. But even assuming Yaya does hit all the radishes from her bun, whatever the fuck you call this thing, assuming around 15 seconds of healing presence going from burst to skill, and with a lot of math stuff I can't be asked to say but will hopefully be on screen, Yayao ends up with around 5.3k healing per second, whereas Kokomi ends up getting around 6k. And if we assume both get full HP artifacts to maximize their healing, I don't even think I need to say he would win. And even beyond that, healing isn't the problem here, it's just the fact that your characters have no HP to tank things regardless. With multiple enemies and with blooms, you're getting hit so constantly that it doesn't matter who was level 90 for the healing, you'd be getting annihilated either way. And just because I know people are going to say he's tilted, don't take it seriously, well, his chat certainly did. And also,
Someone explain how Yao Yao better than Kokomi? She heals a lot more. She's not better, but she definitely heals a lot more.
that person who asked that question is now going to go around with the notion that Yayao heals a lot more than Kokomi, which just isn't true. Yayao only really out-heals Kokomi in the first 5 seconds of her burst state, but after that it's no competition on top of Kokomi having much better uptime, where Yayao can have more than 5-second gaps in her healing depending on how you rotate. And actually, let's play a game here. I'm going to show some clips from his stream doing Abyss and struggling. Can you guys figure out what he's doing wrong that he happens to do multiple times?
Does that sound like a good idea? Okay. I mean, she heals a lot more. She's not better, but she definitely heals a lot more.
He's not putting Kokomi's E down to heal. Like, he needs the health and he has a burst, so uptime issues wouldn't matter, and he also has sacrificial fragments, getting the E back regardless of what he does. So by not using the jellyfish at all and opting to just keep doing the same rotation over and over and over, he's just making survivability worse.
Right now, our bottlenecks for comfort, the thing that's preventing us from being comfortable, is not Nahida being low level. It's Yao Yao being low level.
What?
So I think she's more important to level than Nahida right now. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna level her.
His account, his choice. And that is all for this piece of evidence. So, yeah, something tells me Zajef likes Yao Yao, and I don't really think he likes Kokomi very much. He always seems to underestimate her a lot. He started the whole double healer Kokomi and Barbara Nilo team thing, expecting Kokomi to not heal enough, and considering the fact that me mentioning it right now is probably the first time you've heard of it in months, you can see how well that aged. Zajef very clearly does have his biases, and the reason I think it's a problem here more than any other content creator I've courted is that Zajef has a brain. Literally no one challenged him when he said Yaya could out-heal Kokomi. His chat just agreed and even reciprocated this notion. This isn't the first time this has happened as well, with Zajef failing to fact check stuff. Just look at any Zajef requirement sheet. I say this in almost every Genshin court, but viewers will always side with their favorite content creators without looking into things themselves, which is how misinfo commonly spreads. This is why I think it's always best to do your own research on theory crafting related topics yourself, if you have the time or the passion to do so, or just expand the scope of the theory crafting you look into. Apologies for the small tangent back on trial. For directly giving out unverified information to an untainted fellow, that will be 2 years added to your sentence, followed by being subject to opening and learning how to use the energy recharge calculator. Pretty valuable to know for the future. And lastly, a scripted YouTube apology to this poor soul. We already have it ready, just need the okay for me to send it to them.
I made a severe, disgusting lapse in my judgment. When I made those statements, I was not in the right state of mind, and therefore I would like to apologize for any misunderstandings that have occurred due to this. And I especially want to extend my sorrows to Fishy Bagels and however the situation affected you. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to Flip.
Now for our final piece of evidence, we're going to go with a double whammy. Shut the fuck up. Of two of Zajef's Ask Zaj, and we'll see where we go from there. Okay, before anything starts, I'm adding one more year to your sentence because why are these videos so fucking
Oh yeah, the 1.5 units can actually be a downside in some teams. If you do the same setup that you would be able to do with the other Dendro units, starting with your Dendro, and then using Fischl, and then Kazuha, you can see that I didn't actually get a swirl. Now there are ways to work around that, but those ways, you have to know them, and it makes playing the teams more difficult. Basically, in this situation, what you'd have to do is instead of just starting with Nahida's E, you start with Katsing's E before that.
If an issue is solved by making the most minute adjustment at the start of your rotation which doesn't affect later cooldowns, is not something worthy enough to be called a weakness. It's not even necessarily more difficult, nothing complex is happening, you are just pressing E on a different character to start with.
Another thing that very much can happen in your teams, if you're not using an on-field Electro unit, even if you get your initial Electro Swirl, it is very possible that with her Dendro application, you end up losing the Electro Aura on the enemies, in which case an infusion won't swirl.
If you are using a Dendro on-fielder like Alhaitham on Quicken, there is no really heavy reason to use an Onamo unit, let alone Kazuha, who only buffs the Electro unit there. That is just bad team building, more so than it is a weakness. Also, it's ironic because most of these issues could be solved by just using Sucrose over Kazuha.
I'll show it here so that we can actually, like, see it. I'm not gonna put Fischl in here just because I want it to be easy to see, and Fischl's gonna have too many numbers.
Fischl also happens to fix this issue, mostly making this test disingenuous.
Let me show it again, but this time I'll keep attacking with Nahida to show that when you do that, you just don't actually get swirls at all.
Wait, so Fischl is too many numbers, but Nahida auto-attacking isn't? Also, is this supposed to be a surprise? You're using insanely strong off-fields Dendro and fast on-fields Dendro and not swirling. It's like being surprised that you don't forward vape on double Hydro. What weakness are you trying to outline here? The problem barely happens enough to affect you with double Electro, and on double Dendro, that's a weakness of having an Onamo with a Dendro on-fielder more than it is a weakness of Nahida. At least he does say later that it isn't a big problem, but the test and the amount of time spent detailing it just didn't feel necessary. Zajef states within this video that he basically never wants to encourage spending and pulling for units, which is why I think he does a lot of the time shit on limited 5 stars a lot more heavily as they effectively cost money, which is obviously good. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, but this also does cause him to have to reach for downsides like he does here, and he does here.
But obviously she also has non-Dendro teams. Like, Raiden National is still Raiden National. Raiden Hyper is still very good. And the fact that she has those teams on top of her Dendro teams also increases her pull value because it makes her more versatile. Right, versatility is something that she kind of didn't have before. She used to be a unit that, like, if your Bennett is otherwise occupied, she's kind of not that good. Like, she's still fine in, like, double Hydro, I guess. It works, but it's not, like, she's not necessary for that to work.
Got to give applause to Zajef for one of the most impressive displays of self-contradiction I've ever witnessed. It took less than one sentence for his point there to not make sense. Raiden National is still Raiden National, but Raiden Double Hydro, fuck me, doesn't need Raiden to work. Not like the National Core is memed for the fact that the entire roster can go in the last slot and it still makes a functional team. And it's even worse because Raiden serves the exact same purpose for both teams. On Rational, she lowers everyone's ER requirements so they can all run offensive weapons instead of someone needing a Fav weapon, which is the exact same case on Double Hydro. On Double Hydro, you still ideally want Xingqiu or Yolon to hold a Favonius weapon for much comfier ER requirements, but with Raiden you can ditch it on both of them as Raiden fills in the gap, making her one of the best Double Hydro drivers. Also,
Right, versatility is something that she kind of didn't have before. She used to be a unit that, like, if your Bennett is otherwise occupied, if you need your Bennett, like, somewhere else, she's kind of not that good.
Raiden has a ton of competitive non-Bennett teams even without Dendro. I genuinely don't get this take.
You could also, I guess, play Raiden Aggravate, but honestly...
What do you mean by that? She gets around the same amount of aggravate procs as other Electro characters. The only issue is compared to Keqing or Yai, she can't be quick swapped, but over Keqing she makes up for the fact that she actually does damage, and she has a much wider reach than both Yai and Keqing with her hits. Actually, you know what? That will conclude our last piece of evidence for today. Zajef? As I said before, it seems he just hyper-focuses on issues that don't practically matter too much to demerit 5-star characters. On top of him being extremely dismissive to ideas he hasn't fully tested like a majority of Raiden comps which he just brushed off as not that good. This will result in another year extension for a total of 4 years in the Grey Bar Hotel, with a very high chance of parole if you can fund me a time machine so I can get back all the time I spent. What court is now closed. All in all, if you do just want good consistent info on characters and more advanced game knowledge on YouTube, Zajef is definitely going to be your best bet without a doubt. It would be blasphemy for me to really say otherwise. Another reason why I really wanted to court him is because 1, no one would expect it, and 2, this also opens the door for me to court a lot more Genshin content creators other than the ones that are generally just community punching bags. So maybe I do drop a real 10-10 Genshin court, we'll see. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe and comment your thoughts, as I'd love to hear them and I respond to almost every single comment. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.
Stay with me, little bitch, yeah, you know that I'm no man. To be clever like a snitch, no thoughts, no stamps. New hoes, 10 toes, new guac on the bands. New whip, new chips, new kicks, Jackie Chan, as she pay. Bad bitch, no bag, I just hit another lick and she be counting in my